Thanks for joining us today on Leadership Log, which is a podcast for topics of interest to the Lifecycle Management Center community. And today the topic of interest is feedback. How do you give it? How do you get it? How do you conduct it? And so we're joined by two senior leaders who have a great deal of experience dealing in this topic. And we'll let them introduce themselves to you. Start with you, Chief Croft.
Well, thank you. I'm Chief Croft. I've been in the Air Force for 28 years, and since about 1996, I've been a supervisor of personnel. So learned a lot over the course of those many years, made a lot of mistakes, did a lot of things right and wrong, so I hope to pass on a little bit of that to you today.
Thank you. And Chief Angel?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to be a part of this. As mentioned, I'm Chief Master Sgt. Angel. I am the Agile Combat Support Directorate, Senior Enlisted. I've been in a little over 25 years, and like Chief Croft, I've supervised since probably about 97, 98. And so really looking forward to this conversation, and hopefully you guys will get some input from us.
Okay, great. So we'll start off kind of on the simple end of scale. Day-to-day things that come up inside a workplace, it could be somebody comes in a few minutes late to work. It could be that someone did an especially good job helping a customer. But for those day-to-day kind of small topics, how do you deal with feedback, and how important is it to address things like that quickly? We'll start with Chief Croft.
That's a good question. I believe there's a need to address those small ones quickly because they're fresh in somebody's mind, they're fresh in your mind, and sometimes just a little bit of an addressing of that minor issue can prevent larger issues over time. So if somebody's late, obviously I want to find out why they were late, but I do want to have that discussion with them either that morning or sometime that day before they go home, just to kind of bring it up, see what's going on. One of the things I've learned is sometimes that, hey, I was late or I've been late a few times is actually a symptom of a much larger problem. And I think by getting to it quickly, we can kind of forestall or prevent things from snowballing out of hand. Chief Angel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Chief Croft. I agree. I found over the years that whether good or bad, we'll talk kind of bad first, coming late to work. I think the reason why I don't want to waste time addressing that is because I have often found that individual is having a much larger problem, and being late to work is just the result of all the stress or the things that have compounded. And so, as a leader, I don't ever want to waste the opportunity to maybe see the second or third order effects of what they're going through. And so if it's just simply being late, then we address it and we get back to work. But sometimes, as you know, Chief, we have to dial a little more in and really get after a bigger problem that comes out of a simple feedback session like that.
Yeah, I would add one thing to that is anytime you're going to give somebody feedback, even if you think it's a minor issue, you may want to have some free time set aside on your calendar for that. And the reason I say it is that if you're trying to do that kind of feedback when you're in between meetings and rushing off to the next spot, you're really not going to get a lot out of it. And plus, if the individual decides at that point that they want to open up and tell you what is truly going on in their life, you're going to need some time to sit and maybe unpack that, address it, and see where you can help or where you can get somebody to help them. So make sure you have time on your calendar when you go to talk to somebody about, something where an attitude or an issue needs to be addressed.
What about documentation? Do you always document something like that? You just make like a short note to yourself that you spoke with a person? And again, it could be a good topic or a bad topic, either one.
I do. It's not that I would go through formal documentation every time, unless it's absolutely required. But usually I'll just jot a note to myself, a short memo just to say, hey, on this date, talk to so-and-so about being late or another issue. Just as a memory jogger, because I want to make sure that if there are any trends, I can notice them, but also that I'm applying things fair and equitably. You know, I want to make sure that I've done the basics first. I talked to the individual. I did this on this date, and then I have a running record for myself to say, hey, I've already talked to you about this 3 times or 4 times. And then you can begin to kind of ramp the perhaps disciplinary measures, but addressing it in a maybe a more firm manner.
Chief Answer, do you agree with that?
I do, and you know, and I'll take the flip side of the conversation. You know, I often jog things down that happen positively as well, and that's because sometimes I don't want to highlight it right away. You know, I want the individual who thinks that they're just doing their job or it's something simple, you know, but it jogs something in me that showed determination, or an overachiever, somebody who's giving extra, you know, the things we can't teach. And I'll write that down, and then maybe a week later, I'll go back and surprise them with some type of recognition, or that way it kind of means more because they've kind of forgot about it. And so if I don't write that down, as the chief said earlier, we get busy with meetings at our level, and sometimes we will lose that thought process. And I never want to be able to, you know, I always want to be able to capture it.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, your memory is not as good as you think it is. So, you know, if you have 1 or 2 people, you might be able to balance that. But as you get larger and larger organizations, more and more people, if you don't jot that down somewhere, you'll forget about it. And the time frame to address things or to give somebody an attaboy is kind of limited.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely write it down for sure.
Now, I had a boss once many years ago, but she was the best at giving negative feedback. And by negative feedback, I mean feedback that was kind of meant to encourage you to be better, okay? But to leave you with a positive impression, you know. And I used to jokingly say that she was someone who could, you know, really rub you over the coals. But then you would thank her for it afterwards, you know, because you left feeling like it was a positive experience. So how do you do that? I mean, what is the trick for doing that, for giving someone negative feedback, or feedback, again, meant to encourage them to be better, but leave them with a positive impression? Chief Croft?
That's a good question. I think what you just gave us was the definition of tact. Something young Supervisor Croft did not have many years ago. It tended to come off the top rope on folks who had that infraction. What I learned over time was to be successful at it, you always address the issue, not the person. Because if you start talking about them and what they did and those things, then what happens is they become defensive, you know, probably rightfully so, that you are attacking them personally, rather than addressing the behavior that has occurred. If you have repetitive, hey, I've been late, or poor quality work, or they're just not keeping up with the day-to-day tasking levels, it's always good to sit them down, I think, and talk to them about the issue at hand. Here is what I see. Here is where I think I've given you guidance that says you're supposed to perform at this level, or be here at this time, or, you know, whatever the issue is. Can you help me understand why you're not able to do that? Is there something I'm not providing you? Because you may sit them down and say, hey, I told you had to produce X widgets an hour, and you're meeting that by half. And if you just kind of go at it on that issue, you may not learn that they didn't get trained in a certain way, that you didn't provide what you said you would provide, those things. So having, I think, a conversation with somebody to understand the nature of that, and then help them to get and develop that action plan to get on track. I think that's where you get to the point, you know, where you've kind of rubbed them over the coals and said, hey, you could have done better. But at the end, they feel like they got something out of it too. Ted, what do you think?
Yeah, Chief, I agree with you. You hit some really key points that I try to focus on in those scenarios. One is that the minute you make it personal, it's no good for you or the member. And so you might as well at that point stop and recognize that you've made it personal, and maybe admit that and say, hey, let's take a different approach of how to go to this, right? Because we're all human, no matter what our ranks are or our status within our jobs. It's okay to stop a feedback session and go, hey, I kind of want to revector this because I can see you're getting defensive. I'm starting to get tempered, and I'm the boss, so I'm probably going to win. And so you want to kind of look at it more from hey, I'm in here to help, right? We have an issue, we have to address it. But in the end, I think the compassion or the passion you have as a leader should come forward. And if you do that with your individuals, I always tell my people that normally if Chief Angel is having a conversation that you're not comfortable with you probably just need to listen a little bit and reflect and see, what didn't happen? What feedback did he give me that I didn't follow? Because normally he's a pretty nice guy. He normally is asking me how my day's going, what's going on, how's my family? And so if we're having one of those negative conversations, I think people will realize that, wow, Chief Angel or Chief Croft or whoever the case is not normally in that capacity. So let's, humble ourselves on both sides and get to how we get it fixed or improve the behavior.
Yeah, and I think I would add one thing to that is before you go into those feedback sessions where you have got to counsel somebody on a failure on their part or something they're not doing, be very conscious of your emotional state at that point and the things you got going on in your life. Because if you're at the least bit upset about something else or frazzled or just, you're in a stressful situation and then you go into that, you're going to bring that with you. You really need to come from a position of calmness that you're not thinking or focused on other things you got going on in your life. And you can really address that situation, just it in particular, and not bring your other emotional state with you. Because that's sometimes where you start getting heated and you're not mad at them, you're mad at something else, but now it's being transferred over.
So I think that's a really great point that especially when you get into what is going to be a difficult conversation, it's really important for you to prepare yourself. For one, those are conversations that we just don't want to have for the most part. You don't want to have that conversation with that person. You probably don't want to address the topic that you're going to be talking with them about. And they likely don't want to receive it either. And so, mentally, you've got to have yourself in a good space before you go into that so that you're ready for it, Chief Angel, what do you do to help prepare for these difficult conversations like that?
So I will tell you the best thing or the best advice that I think I can give is to know your people. And we say that all the time, but I truly mean it. There's certain ways that I may talk or counsel one individual that I can't do with another because of how they react or how they receive information. And I always equated it back in the day when I was a young airman and I maybe got in trouble quite a bit. It didn't do a whole lot of good to lecture me or yell at me or do those type of things. But boy, if you gave me a piece of paperwork, it changed my demeanor because then it almost felt like it was attacking my pride, right? Like, oh, I got a piece of paperwork. And so I just use as an example of when you really know your people, we can do those things where you take the emotion out, right? You prepare yourself to go into that room and you know how they're going to react to certain things. And so you try to prep yourself to lead the conversation away from the things that are going to trigger them so that you can get a positive result on the backside.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things I think about too is, you're talking to an individual. You want to know that individual, like Chief Angel said, what makes them tick and what is going to have the best effect on them. But you should also think about another thing too is while the Air Force says that the supervisor is the primary mentor of a subordinate, it doesn't say you're the only mentor. And there are probably instances that you're going to run into where it may behoove you to go find somebody else to help tell that story to them. Somebody who relates to them a little better, somebody who may have a rapport with them that you do not have, and somebody that might be able to reach them and tell them what you're trying to tell them. Because sometimes, especially as, Chief Angels and I, our time in service, our time in grade, our all of this stuff, we have people working for us that are 10, 15 years younger than we are, maybe as much as 20, and you're from a different time frame. You have a different perspective, and sometimes when you're trying to explain something to somebody who's a generation different than you, it just may not be reaching them. So you might have to reach out to your own network and say, hey, I need somebody to help me get through to this person because whatever I'm doing is not working. So consider reaching out. You don't have to be the one that's always counseling and mentoring folks.
So we talk about having these tough conversations, but those need to be balanced with good conversations as well. But it seems like a lot of times supervisors look at when you do something well or do a good job in the workplace, that's what's expected of you, And so rather than praise you say, well, that's what I expect that you're going to do on a day-to-day basis. But it seems to me like it's important to kind of balance that. Sometimes you have to have the tough conversations, but you got to balance the good with the bad. Do you agree, Chief Croft?
I do. You can't just hammer on somebody all the time. You do have to give them some attaboys, attagirls. And it doesn't have to be over the top. There are things that, we do expect folks to perform at a high level. So sometimes I think our desire to follow the core values, our desire to have folks perform at a high level leads us down the path of, yeah, you did your JOB, congratulations, you get a paycheck for that every 2 weeks. But sometimes we have to step back and realize if somebody did something well, maybe it's just a casual mentioning, hey, I really liked how you did this. You did a great job. Just kind of give them that pat on the back that they may need, because I'll go back to some of our earlier discussions. You don't know what's going on in somebody's life, and by you just stopping for a second and saying, hey, when you did that task, you just did it to an outstanding level. Keep that up. You're doing a great job. I've been watching what you're doing. And maybe like Chief Angel said, some of those attaboys you wrote down, revisit those. But let people know they're doing a good job, because that may be the only good news they've gotten all week, and maybe in some time. So you might help them out a little bit by doing that.
Chief Angel?
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. It's so easy to focus on things when they go bad. It's hard as a leader to focus on some of the simple successes. Big successes are easy, right? They're out of the box. They jump off the paper. It's a no-brainer. I have to go give this person recognition. But as Chief Croft said, you just never know what that moment's going to mean to the person. And so you can do it many, many different ways. And I think one way that I try to do it is sometimes I just write them a personal letter, and it may only be a couple sentences that says, hey, the other day, you probably don't even remember this, but this really impressed me because nobody was watching. You could have easily taken the easy way out, but you did it the right way, as you're supposed to, right? Excellence in all we do means that you're supposed to give an honest effort in your primary duties. And I think that recognizing that is important, because people who do things right all the time, or the majority of the time, still need to be told they're doing things right. Right. And so, we always say sometimes that, the Air Force needs good master sergeants, right? And they may not be senior master sergeants or chiefs in the future. But those master sergeants, those airmen, whoever those people are, they need to be told they're doing a great job, right? It's just not the people who are excelling or blasting through the process or the ranks or whatever the scenario is.
Yeah, definitely don't assume that they know they're doing a good job, because they may be plugging away at whatever task they've been assigned and not sure am I doing this right? Anybody notice? And just, taking a moment to let them know that you notice that they are doing a good job. I think it goes a long way, and probably a lot further than a trophy or a ribbon or some other form of award that we can do. Just creating that human connection.
I think sometimes it's nice just to know that what you did was noticed by somebody, and yeah, a few words like that can go a long way. So it's tougher now since we're all kind of in our separate corners, so to speak, teleworking most of the time. We don't have that same day-to-day contact in the office that we used to have with our teammates. And so it's a little tougher sometimes to stay connected, and sometimes that disconnectedness, that sense of distance between us can be leave you feel very isolated. So, so to me, that seems like it's more important for us now to reach out more to our teammates and try to connect more to make sure that people are doing well with each other. So I just wanted to see what your thoughts about that are, and especially if you think someone might have something that's troubling them, how do you reach out to them to try and to connect on that? Chief Croft?
That's a tough one. We didn't have a chance to ease into this environment and study the effects and create a bunch of training materials and teach you how to go forth and lead digitally. We just kind of woke up one morning and they said, don't come back to work until we tell you to. And while some people are probably thriving in this environment, as an introvert, I love this. I don't have to, deal with 200 people a day and watch my energy level just deplete instantly. But some people, they really need that human connection day to day, because that's helping kind of keep them moving along. And I'll go back and revisit what Chief Angel said, a few questions ago, which is you got to know your people. So, my exec, for instance, knowing her and knowing about her before we went into this environment has helped me be a teammate with her in this environment, so that I can kind of sense if something doesn't seem quite right, if she's not as chatty as she usually is, if she seems to be a little off, I can dig a little deeper and go, okay, well, tell me what's going on. By knowing her family's names and knowing a little bit about her, I'm able to kind of peek through that or walk through that and ask her certain questions to see if I can find out what's going on. But again, I'll go back to something I said before. You may not be the best person for that. And I do know some of her friends, and sometimes it might be easier to go talk to one of them and go, hey, can you talk to her and tell me, do you think something's going on? Does she need any help, or is she okay? So it's going to always go back to, how do you know that person? Because if you suddenly formed a team today of a bunch of unknown people, we're going to have to spend a lot of time figuring out who each other are if we're going to figure out if there's anything wrong or right with the individual. What do you think, Chief?
Yeah, Chief Croft, I agree. Unlike you, so we're a little bit different. I always joke that teleworking wasn't made for chiefs. I will no longer say that now. But what I mean is most of us at our level are very engaged with our people. We like to be out knowing what's going on. What can we make better? What can we fix? And I will tell you, to your point, when they dropped teleworking on us immediately, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know how to get my computer to work, let alone I started to find out that, hey, I had brand new members of my organization who don't even know what our leaders look like, let alone their supervisors, let alone their teammates. And so I found it very important at that time that I started to engage a lot of the younger folks initially. Hey, how are you doing? Well, Chief, I'm not doing well because I'm single. I've been in the Air Force for 3 weeks and I have no friends and I don't have pets and I'm cooped in a 1-bedroom apartment and can't go anywhere. And I was like, whoa, we didn't think about that. Those stories. And so as Chief Croft mentioned, what I then did was turn the seasoned lieutenants on those new folks and said, hey, start finding out what we don't know, start asking questions, start doing your Zoom parties and those type of things, and let me know where we as leaders can help, either help fix something or provide feedback. And then I obviously took that to the branch chiefs and the directorate level, et cetera, to go, hey, we need to pay attention to this, because there's folks that still today, I don't even know what they look like. And they got here in like April, because we just have not had that interaction like we used to.
So if you think that something might be up with one of your folks, and I guess this is an indication if you really know them well, how persistent are you in trying to dig out to that? I mean, a lot of times you'll ask someone how they're feeling or how they're doing, and they say, "Oh, I'm fine," but you know that they're really not. I mean, how persistent, how tough do you dig into that, Chief Croft?
Yeah, if you suspect or think or get that inkling that something is just not right, you have to dig. And one thing I've noticed, and I always tell you, when the boss and the chief come around and they ask somebody how they're doing, you always get the same answer: everything's great, we're doing fine.
That's right.
Which is, could be true, but they're not going to tell you if something's wrong. But I heard a 3-star talk one time, and he goes, you got to ask them 3 times, because the first time you're going to say, hey, how you doing? And, oh, I'm fine. Things good. And then you might have a little bit more of a conversation, and then you ask me, so really, how are things going? Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, things are okay. And then you talk a little bit more. And by the time you've asked that 3 times, you may begin to pick at if there's an issue back there. Either that you've worn them down, or they've gotten comfortable enough with you to talk to you. And it always comes down to that comfort level. Some people will have an immediate comfort level with you, and they will tell you their life story. Some of it you don't want to hear, and you're like, But some people, you're going to have to work at it to build that comfort level to get something out of them. But you have to be persistent, because I believe you have a window of opportunity to really address what's going on with somebody before it gets too far down the road to do anything about. Whether, if we're talking about finances, you might have a limited opportunity to get them to Air Force Aid or somebody like that, to get them a loan or a grant to kind of help them out. If it's a relationship issue, same thing, get them to a counselor or a chaplain. But the longer things go on, they do not get better. Right. They typically just kind of get worse and fester. So I'm a big fan of you got to pick at it and see what you can find out. Chief Angel, what's your experience?
Yeah, Chief, I agree. I have found 2 things for me. One, up front, I meet with everybody in my organization when they get to the organization, no matter what their rank, no matter if they're civilian, it doesn't matter. They come and have a one-on-one with me. And really at that time is where I try to set that groundwork that Chief Croft's talking about, right? That comfort level. They're probably not comfortable that day, but I really try to set them at ease that, hey, you're the most important thing, right? If I don't take care of you, or if you're not willing to come in here and unload to me so that I can get you help or help you guide you, the mission's not going to get done. So I need to focus on you so that you can be healthy to do the mission. So that's one way that helps. And then I'll back up to something else Chief Croft said when he was talking about his exec is sometimes when I feel something just isn't right, I don't always go right to the member. I may go to a friend of theirs and go, hey, is there something in their personal life that I'm not tracking? I want to go ask about this, but can you give me a wag of, hey, Chief, leave this one alone. We got it. Or, hey, no, Chief, you are spot on. And here's a little background that may help you open up that conversation when you actually have the meeting. And then again, as Chief Croft said, very rarely do I ask it once and they throw it all out on the table. I normally have to kind of get them comfortable, ask some questions. And then, like he said, the second or third time, they will tend to go, hey, Chief, this is what's going on. And if you can help, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. And so in those situations like that, when you find someone who maybe they need some help, or how do you go about trying to help them develop an action plan, so that you don't just say, well, okay, you should go fix that, but maybe give them some sort of tangible steps on how to do that, and then, stay engaged with them to make sure that they're actually taking action on it. Chief Croft.
Yeah, the action plan is key. You can identify a problem all day long, but if you don't identify a way to fix it, it's not going to do you much good. But one of the things I would say is know your limitations. I've had people sit in front of me and tell me things, and I'm like, I am not qualified in any shape or form, whatever, to help you. But I can get you to somebody who can help you. And so when it comes down to those deeper issues, you definitely want to know your resources that are available to you. So in the case of, it could be Air Force Aid, it could be chaplains, it could be mental health, it could be EAP, it could be a number of resources, but you do need to know those resources and a little bit about them, especially when you start talking about military resources versus our civilian resources versus other things. And how do I direct somebody to those resources? How do I encourage them to those resources? Do I need to make the phone call myself? Or can I encourage them to do that and then just kind of walk with them as they go through it? And then follow up. I've sent folks to counselors. I've sent them over to financial aid. I've sent them to various places throughout their career to get them the help that only a professional could give. But I always stayed in touch. I would always meet up with them once a week. How is it going? You don't have to tell me details, but tell me, are you getting better? Is the issue getting better? What do you need from me now? And how can I help you at this moment?
Yeah, Chief. Chief, I agree. I think the key that if you don't document anything in our line of business, whether you wear the uniform or you're a civilian, we're pretty task-oriented people, right? If we write it down, we kind of have our checklist and we figure out how to get through it. And so being able to sit down and let them make a plan, right? Not me make their plan. They make a plan that they're writing down is important to me because it shows that it's their plan, right? I'm not writing it down for them. They are. And then Chief Croft, man, you are spot on with being humble enough to realize that is out of my lane or not in my league. And I always tell my folks that, sometimes you may come in my office and you just speak, and I'm not going to give you any advice because I just can't. I don't have the advice to give you. The key is to know those resources Chief Croft spoke of, right? Know where to get them, know the wave tops to talk about them, to set them at ease that there is help. And that's really what you're doing in my mind in that scenario. You're setting them at ease that there are programs and there are things out there to take care of our members, our DoD members across the board. And we're going to get you that help. And then if you don't follow up, my experience is they won't come back, right? You have to show that passion that I care. I said earlier, people are the most important resource. So once they open up to you and you start helping them, you have to follow up. And then what you'll notice is they follow up with you. You don't follow up with them, right? Hey, Chief, it's getting better. Thanks for the help. And you get to to the good part of that scenario, which is they're better moving forward.
Yeah, and those are very good points. And I'll add one more on top of it is sometimes an individual just needs you to listen. I'll tell you as, it's a particularly, I think, bad male habit, and especially a military person's habit of trying to solve every problem. You come to me with a problem, I give you an action plan, and off you go. But sometimes folks just want you to listen. They just want to lay it out. They want to tell somebody. They want to have you just nod your head in understanding and sympathy and feel it with them. And that may be enough for them. They may be like, oh, I feel better. And then, like, Chief Angel said, you're just going to follow up with them to make sure that has worked for them. But sometimes it's not about an action plan or solving their problem. Sometimes it's just about listening and being there, and asking those open-ended questions, not yes or no, but how do I get them to talk a little more, to kind of get everything off their chest and out of their system, and make sure that they don't need any additional help after that.
This has all been very interesting information. And before we close, I just wanted to go to each of you and ask if there's anything that we've left out or anything that you think that you'd like to go back and really emphasize to people. Chief Croft.
I'd probably point out a couple things. One is, I think it was Covey who said, seek first to understand and then to be understood. You're dealing with people, and people have people issues, people have their quirks, people have their challenges, and no two people are alike. Some people are really quiet and shy. Some people they're going to talk your ear off and they're just happy about everything. And understanding the person, understanding the challenges in their life, and understanding where they want to be, a year from now, 5 years, 10 years from now, will help you to be a better supervisor. Understand them before you start talking, because you're bound to get it wrong. So if you understand them, you understand where they're coming from, you understand their goals, their dreams, their aspirations, then you can help them reach those goals. And, you might have to vector them a little here and provide a little critical feedback here or constructive criticism there. But I think it comes down to knowing that person and what makes them tick and what they're looking for out of life and maybe out of the Air Force or some other job. And then you can help them get there. But remember, it is a human thing. These are people, and they need encouragement. They need feedback, they need mentorship, they need guidance, they need friendship, they need all of those things. They are not just mindless workers who do whatever you tell them to do. So keep in mind that they are human and that you are too. And I think it'll make for a great relationship. Chief?
Hey, yeah, I'll pile on to that. I think we've heard a common theme during this session that, know your people. When somebody comes into my office, I don't ask them what they do for the Air Force. I ask them about who they are, what are their goals, what are their aspirations, what are their family's goals, if they have kids, spouses, etc. And so to me, that's really the foundation, because it shows them that it's not just, like you said, Chief Croft, a task or a job or, a mindless widget that we keep working on day after day after day. It shows that as a supervisor, as a mentor, whatever the phrase is, that you've set the boundary up front, that it's about them, and then you bring the work piece into it. And that's where you may have to have those tough conversations about, hey, you're underperforming, or you need to do a little better. Oh, wait, you did really great. But I promise you that if you don't establish that connection up front, those conversations will be harder. They still need to be had, right? So as supervisors, we're always growing. Even as chiefs, we are humble enough to admit, hey, I didn't handle that quite right. Or, hey, I could have done that a little different. Hey, Chief Croft, how would you handle this? This is what I did, and I don't feel it went really well. Can you give me some advice? Or before I have the meeting, hey, Chief Croft, you've had a little bit more experience. What have you done in the past, right? Give me some of those. Or just going simply to my boss, going to my PEO and going, hey, how would you handle this from the officer side, to get a different perspective. And I think when you're open and communicative, feedback works. When you just try to do it because it's a task, feedback becomes very complicated and ineffective in my experience. So I would leave that with everybody is, don't do it because it's a task on the checklist. Do it because we're supervisor, we're humans, as Chief Croft mentioned, and we should be caring and taking care of each other.
I think it's a great place to end right there. So, gentlemen, thanks for joining us today on Leadership Log, and appreciate all your time.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Appreciate the opportunity.